Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First United Methodist podcast. I am your host, Thomas First, and I will be interviewing people from our congregation so that through great stories, laughter, and tales of the experience of the God who is an active agent in our world, we can get to know one another. Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First UMC podcast. I am Tom First, and I am glad you're joining us for another episode. Today, I am excited to introduce to you to one of the first people I met when our churches were coming together, Sharon Ammons. Sharon, did we meet in those little cohort groups that kind of got together for a year or so before the churches combined?
We did. We were part of what was the team? There was an official name for the team, but I forget of
The
that
awesomeness team.
the awesomeness team that was exploring the merging of the two churches. And I think I knew we were going to get along just fine when one of the first words out of your mouth were, "We have an LGBTQ staff member. Will that be an issue?" And I was like, "No, not an issue. We're fine. We're on the
Like
same
it was
page."
it was such an interesting moment because the bishop had the idea for the churches to join, and I didn't know, anything about where, First Methodist had been historically on some of those things, but I knew like where we were and what we wanted to sort of emphasize. And I was like, there's really no point in us having a conversation going forward if we're not on the same page about this subject.
Right,
Um,
right.
and so, yes, I remember that. And I remember our friend Amy Roberts also said something about it. And it was so incredible for me to like hear somebody else in our congregation sort of talk about it. So anyway, I'm glad that that was the
Yeah.
moment you knew you liked me, or at least you liked something about me.
I knew we were going to get along okay. The liking came later.
Notice, listeners, she did not say she likes me. She just said we would get along.
I said the liking came later, Tom.
I am so
Uh,
glad, Sharon. I always enjoy talking to you. I am so glad that you decided to join me for this podcast. One of the things I'd like to just sort of start with and ask people about is if you were to think back, like, and it doesn't have to be childhood, but you can go back as far as you want. When you think about someone in your life who sort of first created the memory of God for you, or first you remember like having this profound sort of spiritual influence on you, like who is that person and why were they so profound for you?
it's interesting. I'll have to give you a little bit of quick backstory for this to make sense. My family growing up was Catholic, but we were not practicing. And when I was 14, my mom got remarried and could not get remarried in the Catholic Church because she was divorced. So we became
Sure.
Episcopalians. And my stepfather was very religious. So we would go to the Episcopal Church every Sunday, and I was an acolyte and very involved. And so it was great to have this church family, but at the same time, things at home were not good. My stepfather was very verbally and psychologically abusive. I was kind of the scapegoat of the family. I had a stepsister and a stepbrother who were treated much better by him than
Wow.
I was. And then at the same time, my mom got sick with cancer. So she was dealing with cervical cancer. I was trying to run the house, help her. Very stressful time of life. And
Yeah.
in the middle of all this, I was trying to learn how to drive. And my stepfather would not teach me how to drive before I went to driver's ed. And driver's ed expected me to know how to drive. And so I was stuck in this, rock and a hard place and just so frustrated because I couldn't figure out a way out of this. And the pastor of the church came to see me one day after school. He knew I was going through a hard time and he took me out for ice cream after school. And he was like, "Tell me what's going on. I know your mom's sick. Everything's hard." And I just started crying. And I was
Wow.
like, "I can't do driver's ed because Doug won't let me learn how to drive. He won't let me drive his car." And this guy just took me to a neighborhood after we finished our ice cream, put me in the driver's seat, and said, "Let me teach you how to drive."
Wow. Wow.
And that to me, I was like, okay, this is God. I need help. And God came and said, "Oh, okay, she needs to learn how to drive. Let me put this guy right where she needs to be." And that really hit home for me at that point. I was like, okay, I'm in a bad place, but God's watching out over me. So
That's
I think that was the
incredible.
first time. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
He was an amazing pastor, really great human being. So,
What's his name?
I don't even remember. Isn't that
Oh,
awful? Because of kind of the trauma of that period, I have
sure.
forgotten a lot of things, and one of
Sure.
them was his name. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would guess that he would probably say more important than my name is just the effect of that on your life.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
for sure.
incredible. And obviously, before the days of Safe Sanctuary, where the pastor could just show up after school and be like, let's go get ice cream and I'll teach you to drive.
Yeah, it was totally in a non-creepy manner. He was totally above board. He just was
Yes,
worried about
it's
me.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things this is, I've done a few of these interviews in preparation for this podcast now. And one of the things that keeps being sort of reinforced in my mind is when I ask people about these early influences, almost nobody like tells me this like big grand story of someone who taught them how to see visions and speak in tongues or something like that. But it's always like these
No.
really small things like this person showed up, took me to ice cream, taught me how to drive,
Paid attention, took care of me, was there for me.
asked
Yeah.
questions about what I needed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I imagine too in that situation where, I mean, you have a mom who obviously like couldn't meet all of your needs. You had a stepdad who was unwilling to meet your needs. And for somebody to say like, what do you need and how can I help you meet those needs? Like there's something
Right.
deeply spiritual about that.
Yeah, and didn't hesitate for a second. Put this random girl behind the wheel of his car and trusted me not to wreck his car. It was huge. It was
What
small,
year
but
was
it was
this?
huge.
What year was
Uh,
this?
see, 84, I think. 84, 85, somewhere around there.
Okay, so all the cars were huge back
All the
then
cars are
and
massive. Yes.
clunking metal. So he was like, well, I guess if she wrecks, like we should be okay because she's not
Yeah.
going over 15 miles an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So related to that question, like, do you have, you grew up Catholic, you had this transition to Episcopalian. Do you have memories of like, sort of your earliest experiences of God or times in your life where, you were just like, yeah, I think God showed up there?
It's really funny. Before I moved to live, before my mom got remarried and we moved about an hour and a half from where we were at the same time. So we were pretty isolated from friends and family. I really don't have a whole lot of
Hmm.
memories of that. I mean, I remember going to church every once in a while, but it was
Yeah.
not a big thing in my life. My mom was not very spiritual.
Yeah.
I think she might have been a little angry at God.
Sure.
She dropped out of college to marry my dad. She thought she was going to have this great life as a stay-at-home mom. It all fell apart. My dad pretty much abandoned us. We've since reconciled, but it was, yeah, for a lot of years I
It's a
had no
hard situation.
contact. Yeah, and so I think she was a little bitter at God because her life
Yeah.
didn't turn out how she expected it to.
Yeah. It is interesting to me. And I wish pastors did a better job of this, of like saying, even the anger at God and the bitterness toward God can be like deeply spiritual, and like, what would it look like to lean into that? But, like God is interested in us, bringing our anger and bitterness. But, for so long, churches have not done that. And so we feel like, well, I just can't have anything to do with God if I'm angry with God.
And then on top of that, she had the whole rejection of when she went to remarry, because her first marriage had not been annulled. The church rejected her again. So
Yeah. It's always so interesting. I mean, it's not just, Catholic churches, but I was thinking about this recently and it's the strength and weakness of the Methodist Church, right? That like on the one hand, like we'll embrace anybody. Like wherever you are, whatever you're about, we'll embrace you. On the other hand, sometimes it feels like we don't really have very many like sort of stipulations for, like what
Right,
discipleship looks like or what like faithful living looks like. But at the
right,
same time, like I was reading, I remember a few years ago, like the Catholic Church, and they're not the only ones who do this, but they were deciding on, whether certain people could receive communion or not. I was like, this communion is not ours to give. Like we receive it as a gift. And this is another situation where like somebody who is spiritually hurting, psychologically hurting, could have used, somebody in the church to embrace them. And instead
right.
it was like, well, here's the rule. You can't now participate and be a part of us.
That is actually, it's funny you bring that up, is one of the reasons why I did not go back to the Catholic Church, because I believe in open table communion. I think that God doesn't pick and choose who's worthy.
Yep.
And it's a real issue for me. Brett was actually in a wedding at a Lutheran church and he was not allowed to take communion. And he was fine with it. He didn't make a big deal, but it was
Sure.
kind of upsetting to me. I was like, how is he, because he's not Lutheran, he's not worthy of communion. And I'm not
Yeah.
trying to pick on the Lutherans or the Catholics. I just personally have an issue with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the reasons you're intentionally Methodist, right? And
Right,
for me,
right,
it's the same thing. I remember whenever I was a Southern Baptist, like they didn't really enforce it, right? But you would kind of get these instructions about sinlessness and holiness or whatever. And so like I would never feel like I was good enough to receive communion. And so and we only did it like once a quarter at the Baptist church anyway, right? And so
right,
like I would go months, years maybe without receiving communion. And then like to be a part of the Methodist church where it's just like, no, your faithfulness is actually not what matters here. What matters is Jesus's faithfulness and
right.
the fact that Jesus gifts his faithfulness to us.
Exactly. That's
Well,
exactly one of the reasons.
well, I'm so glad that you were like thoughtfully reflective about that and just like, hey, no, I want to choose a church that welcomes everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it probably goes back to even, like what you were saying earlier about, the first time we met, it was like, hey, our church has a queer staff member, can you all get on board with that? I think that's an extension of the larger theology of communion where everybody is welcome here. Like it's just nobody gets turned away.
I've had people tell me, like, because I believe in something different, that you're going to hell. And my response to that is always, well, only God gets to decide that, not me. That's not my choice. God knows what's in my heart. So I don't know what's in somebody else's heart. So
Further away from that, like kind of like religious culture I have come, and the further away I get, like I'm just like, what kind of arrogance do you have to assume you know anything about like what is in God's mind or what the afterlife is going to be like? That's so absurd.
well, and this also goes to another of my points of why I chose to be a Methodist is I have real issues too with churches who claim to be the one true church
Mm,
and exclude people from other churches. And I
yeah,
like the fact that we've had, like, we used to do, Temple Israel used to come in and do stuff for our kids. We've worshiped with plenty of other denominations. We've worshiped with Baptists, we've worshiped with CME, and that to me is the essence of what church should be. It should not be my church is the only one. We're exclusive.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you found a perfect fit in Methodism.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
yeah.
like,
It's
not only are you not the right one true church, we're not sure we're the one true church.
right. We try our best. Once again, it's up to God to judge us.
Yeah.
So,
Do you have a person in your life that you think about that, I mean, either now or in the past that you think about is sort of like a spiritual hero or a role model for you?
I can't think of one particular person. There's just people out there I admire who I think use their faith as they're supposed to. I guess Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter would come as an example
Yeah.
of, have somebody who was like the most powerful man in the world and he gets out of that job and he starts building houses for Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah.
That to me is pretty powerful.
And he's always such an interesting person to me too, because like he's the most powerful man in the world, but the reason people didn't like it is because he did not use his power to sort of assert
Right.
dominance.
Right.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah, to think about people on that level who are almost spiritual heroes or disciplers because they on that massa level use their power responsibly.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I think
incredible.
another person I admire who comes to mind is Dolly Parton, just because
Yeah,
she's a genuine human being, but she's also so generous.
yeah,
So
yeah.
she's another one I admire.
That's incredible. I can see in the way your family serves our church, I can see the sort of ethos or the legacy of both Jimmy Carter and Dolly Parton. Just the way you all are serving, the way you teach your son to serve, the way you all give yourselves selflessly. And so it seems to me that their influence on you has been pretty profound.
Well, I appreciate that. That makes me happy. We try. We try.
Uh,
We love it. So
maybe I called your son Jesse the Crown Prince of Memphis First Methodist First United Methodist. Maybe I should call you the Dolly Parton.
wow, I don't know if I'm worthy of that title. Dolly's pretty amazing.
Is there, it was interesting hearing you talk earlier about, just sort of like some of the trauma that you overcame, both, in your family, some psychological things that were obviously like at play in your childhood. And then I imagine some religious implications, but it seems to me you've always struck me as like a person who's like self-confident. You know who God made you to be. You even seem to like you, which not everybody does. And I would imagine like hearing some of that stuff from your background like that was hard fought. That sort of coming out of those experiences and knowing who you are and who God made you to be was something you had to work really hard at.
It was something I had to work really hard at. I did kind of going back to the story of my mom. I did have a lot of family support. I have an amazing family. And when I was 16, my mom did pass away. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She passed away 6 months later. They did not catch it on a pap smear like they were supposed to. So by the time they got to it, it was essentially too late. And at that point, I was still living at home with my stepfather, and the situation was just not good. And my grandparents, who were absolutely amazing human beings, had actually just retired. My grandfather worked for the federal government in Maryland and Virginia for decades. He was a social worker. He worked with children with autism. He did some pioneering work on support groups for parents of kids with autism. This was back when, autism was not a common
Yeah.
diagnosis and people had no support or resources. So when he retired, my grandmother said, I want to move back to Tennessee. She was from Ripley Halls area. And so they had literally just moved back to Tennessee about the time my grandmother got remarried back to Ripley. And my grandparents swooped in, and immediately after the funeral, we were like, yeah, you're not staying here. You're coming to live with us. So pack up your things because you're now going to live in Tennessee, which was a huge change, but for the good. And so I think if it weren't for my grandparents, I probably would not have made it through that. And one of the first things that they did when I got back here is they put me in therapy, and that was
Mm,
extremely helpful.
wow.
Um, yeah, so I
Wow.
had family support, and that made all the difference in the world to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
incredible. Is there a story from your life that you would say sort of give us a picture or a metaphor for who Sharon Ammons is?
Oh, I was thinking about that one, and that's kind of a tough one. Nothing's coming to mind on that one. I think
Yeah.
that's something you'd probably have to ask Brett or Jesse. I think they'd be better at giving you that. I can't think of anything off the top
Yeah,
of my
I was
head.
the person I was interviewing for the episode I just recorded a while ago. That's actually what she did. She said that she asked her family member. She was like, tell me, like, is there a story?"
I should have done that. I did not prepare.
Well, the next podcast, the next time I interview you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when you think, okay, so we can switch them. When you think about God, what kind of pictures come to mind, especially like given that history that you have?
Well, I think, and it's going to sound trite, but this is what I think love is the first thing that comes to mind.
Mm.
love for sure. Beyond that, it's just like knowing there's someone there for you, even when you're at your worst. I mean, I was at my worst. I was taking care of my sick mother. I was
Mm.
feeling like feeling like Cinderella, you know, and God stepped in for me and he sent me this pastor to teach me how to drive. And that was huge. He sent a friend of mine to ask me to prom just to kind of cheer me up. You know, he was there when I needed him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
He sent my
incredible.
he sent my grandparents to save me. I mean, they
Yeah.
literally saved me. I don't know where I'd be today if it weren't for my grandparents. And I'm crying now. Y'all who know me know I'm a crier. So
I am glad for you, Cry. I keep thinking about, and I said this a little bit ago, but I just like keep thinking about these little things that people do, right? Showing up for ice cream, for just taking you to drive, grandparents who, I mean, I know it was no small thing for them, but it was also like this thing that seems thoroughly human, and yet it saved your life, and it's like
yes,
therefore deeply and profoundly spiritual. A friend
yes,
asking you to prom, right? When you have all this grief going on, like it's deeply and profoundly spiritual, like even though it doesn't
yes.
feel like it on the surface.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's incredible. The last question I have,
Hmm.
I you are a longtime member of the church that met on this street corner down on Second Street in Memphis,
Yes.
which was First Methodist. But then we merged our churches a couple of years ago. And what attracted you to this church? What made you stick around after the merger? Like how does this church sort of meet your needs?
Well, I think like a lot of young adults, I kind of fell away from going to church. I went to church in high school, and then in college, I kind of got out of the habit. And Brett and I were dating. We got engaged, and we were talking about our wedding, and we were like, not only do we need to find a place to get married, we also need to find a church home again. We really need to start going to church again. So we knew back in Ripley, we had both been going to the Methodist church, like even before we got married, when we knew each other in high school. So we were like, we'll check out the Methodist church first. We walk into First Methodist, and everyone was so friendly, so
Mm.
kind. And then we went to visit another church that I will not name, but another Methodist church, and nobody said a word to us.
Yeah.
So then we go back to First Methodist, and it was in December, and Martha Wagley was having a Christmas party, Martha and Jerry at their house. And people were saying, "Are you going to the Christmas party?" And we're like, "Well, we're not really members." So, and they were like, "You've been twice, you're a member. Come on, come to the Christmas party." And it was that fellowship that drew us in.
Yeah.
Um, really, and then on top of that, for a lot of years I had had an issue with some churches with kind of the hypocrisy of kind of what we were talking about earlier. You know, we're the one church, you're going to hell if you don't believe in us. And I'm like, this is not what a church should be doing. A church should be loving people and helping people. And we got there, and this is what they were doing.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what got us in, and we just fell in love with the people. The people have
Yeah.
always been amazing. And
Yeah.
then when it came time to meet with Bluff City and like Vicky and Gary Gardo and I were meeting with people like Lucas, and we were just like, we're on the same page. We have the
Mm.
same values. We sat down in one session and talked about values, and they were talking about holy God for love, neighbor, and self, and we were talking about our previous pastor, Andy Rainbow, had talked about spirituality being in, out, and up.
Mm.
And it's the exact same thing. A holy love for ourselves, spirituality in, holy love for God, spirituality up, holy love for neighbor, spirituality out. And we're
Yeah.
like, this is the exact same like core values.
Yeah.
And so that's what's kept us there is those core values and just the amazing people.
Yeah. That's incredible. I think churches often underestimate, and our church, I think, can sometimes underestimate just the power of saying hi to new people and helping
Mm.
them like feel like they belong. And I am so glad to hear this story of the church welcoming you and the church serving other people. And I'm hoping that it can be a legacy of our church going forward for 200 more years. So, uh,
Absolutely.
Sharon, I am so grateful for you joining, and I feel like I learned a ton about you through these questions. And so you were a
Well, thank
fantastic
you.
interview. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the
Um,
opportunity.
you bet. And I think we're gonna have to do it again. I'm gonna figure out a whole new set of 7 or 8 questions, and I'm gonna interview you again. Thank you,
I'm welcome to do
Sharon.
it.
All right.
Thanks.